The Victorian era, often remembered for its grandeur and progress, concealed a far more frightening reality. As the Industrial Revolution transformed cities into hubs of economic prosperity, it also gave rise to unprecedented levels of poverty and hardship. Beneath the glow of flickering gaslights, narrow alleyways teemed with desperation, crime, and violence. The poorest districts became breeding grounds for organized gangs, their ranks filled with men and boys who had known nothing but hunger and hardship. In the absence of social welfare and adequate policing, the criminal underworld flourished, dictating the law of the streets with fists, knives, and sheer ruthlessness. Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool, and London, the great cities of progress, bore witness to the rise of notorious gangs that ruled entire boroughs with an iron grip. These criminal syndicates were not merely pickpockets or petty thieves. They were violent enforcers who engaged in extortion, smuggling, and brutal gang warfare. In areas where law enforcement dared not tread, these gangs dictated their own order, meting out their version of justice to those who crossed them. For the impoverished and the desperate, joining a gang often meant the difference between survival and starvation. Those who resisted their influence often found themselves at the mercy of merciless beatings or worse. For the police, maintaining order in these unruly districts proved to be an insurmountable challenge. The criminal networks operated with deep loyalty and an understanding of the city's labyrinthine streets that allowed them to evade capture. Many officers, underpaid and outnumbered, found themselves powerless to combat the rising wave of violence. Some even fell to corruption, turning a blind eye in exchange for bribes, further entrenching the control of these criminal empires. The overcrowded prisons did little to stem the tide, as many gang leaders continued to run their operations from within their cells, ensuring that their influence remained unbroken. As industry and commerce flourished above ground, the shadows of the underworld grew darker, stretching across entire communities. The brutal existence of Victorian gangs was a stark contrast to the era's celebrated advancements. The streets, lined with soot-covered buildings and filled with the cries of merchants and factory workers, masked a deeper struggle, one where power belonged to those willing to wield violence without hesitation. It was in these streets that the true law of the Victorian era was written, not in the halls of Parliament, but in blood and fear, echoing through the cobblestone alleys long after the gaslights had dimmed. In the industrial heart of Birmingham, a gang unlike any other emerged from the shadows, carving their name into the annals of crime. They were not mere street thugs, they were a force of calculated brutality, known to all as the Peaky Blinders. Clad in tailored suits that masked their ruthlessness, they walked with an air of unshakable confidence, their fleck caps concealing a deadly secret, razor blades sewn into the brims. It was said that a single swipe could blind a man in an instant, a rumor that only fueled their terrifying reputation. But their dominance extended far beyond brawls in dimly lit alleyways. They operated with precision, weaving a web of control over the city's underbelly. At the heart of their empire lay the illegal betting rings, where fortunes were won and lost in the blink of an eye. They ran the racetracks with an iron grip, ensuring that every wager placed lined their pockets. Those who dared to operate outside their authority quickly learned the price of defiance. Businesses were ransacked, debts were collected through blood, and no plea for mercy was ever heeded. Their reach extended deep into the city's economy, where shopkeepers, factory owners, and even politicians found themselves ensnared in a system that thrived on fear. With money flowing steadily and rivals crushed before they could rise, the Peaky Blinders became an unstoppable force. Despite their criminal foundation, the gang held a certain allure, a twisted sense of honor that drew men into their ranks. To outsiders, they were villains, but to those within the streets of Birmingham, they were something more, a symbol of power in a world where survival was never guaranteed. Their enemies did not only come from rival gangs but from the very authorities sworn to uphold the law. However, the police found themselves ill-equipped to battle a group that operated like a well-oiled machine, always a step ahead. Corruption ran deep, and those who weren't bribed into silence often met grimmer fates. The law was merely an inconvenience, a weak and ineffective barrier against an organization that thrived in chaos. As the years passed, the Peaky Blinders' reign tightened around Birmingham like a vice, their presence etched into the very fabric of the city. They were not just criminals, they were legends, figures whispered about in pubs and feared in the darkened corners of the streets. Their empire was built on blood and betrayal, and though the world around them shifted, they adapted, ensuring that their name would not be forgotten. But with power came enemies, rival factions, vengeful lawmen, and the ever-present threat of betrayal from within. The Peaky Blinders had conquered Birmingham, but in a world ruled by violence, the question remained, how long could they hold it? Along the fog-laden docks of Liverpool, where the clang of ship bells and the shouts of merchants filled the air, another gang rose to power through sheer brutality. The High Rip Gang did not rely on cunning or deception. Their authority came from the blood they spilled and the fear they instilled. Unlike the more structured criminal enterprises that thrived in secrecy, they operated in the open, striking with sudden, unrelenting violence. Dockworkers and traders, the lifeblood of Liverpool's bustling economy, found themselves at the mercy of a group that took what they wanted and left only devastation behind. Their victims, chosen at random or for the slightest perceived insult, were left battered in the streets, their moans a chilling testament to the gang's reign of terror. Their methods were as ruthless as they were effective. Ambushes became their signature, with groups of gang members descending upon unsuspecting men in the dead of night or amidst the chaos of a crowded market. They wielded clubs, knives, and whatever crude weapons they could fashion, ensuring that each attack left a lasting mark not just on the victims, but on the city itself. The docks, once a place of commerce and opportunity, became a hunting ground where fear took root. Merchants paid for protection, not out of trust, but out of desperation, knowing that resistance only led to destruction. Law enforcement, stretched thin and unwilling to confront the gang's unchecked violence, found themselves powerless to restore order. What made the High Rip Gang so formidable was not just their savagery, but their ability to exploit Liverpool's booming trade routes. Goods flowed in and out of the port in a constant stream, and the gang saw opportunity in every shipment, every cargo hold, and every weary sailor seeking refuge in a local tavern. The wealth of the city lay unguarded in their eyes, ripe for the taking. Smuggling, extortion, and outright robbery became second nature to them, fueling an empire of chaos. And like more organized criminal syndicates, the High Rip Gang thrived on unpredictability, striking wherever they pleased, their movements as erratic as the tides. Their name became a whispered warning, a curse among those who dared to challenge their control over the docks. Despite their unchecked violence, the gang's dominance could not last forever. As their crimes escalated, so too did the determination of those who wished to see them fall. Rival gangs, envious of their power, sought to challenge their rule, leading to bloody confrontations that turned the streets of Liverpool into battlefields. The authorities, though slow to act, began to push back, bolstered by public outcry and growing pressure to reclaim the city from lawlessness. The High Rip Gang had built their reign on terror, but terror alone was not enough to sustain them. As the news tightened, they would learn that even the most feared predators could become prey. While the streets of London were ruled by violent gangs that thrived on brute force and bloodshed, one group of criminals operated with a different kind of mastery. The 40 Elephants, an all-female gang, built their empire not through intimidation, but through skillful deception. And like the bruisers who brawled in alleyways, these women slipped unnoticed into the city's grandest department stores, blending effortlessly with the wealthy clientele. Dressed in the finest fashion, they carried themselves with an air of sophistication that masked their true intentions. Jewelry, silk, and furs vanished beneath their carefully tailored garments, leaving shopkeepers baffled by the sheer audacity of the thefts. Without a single act of violence, the 40 Elephants plundered London's wealthiest districts, their presence undetected until it was too late. At the heart of this operation was Alice Diamond, a leader as ruthless as she was intelligent. Standing tall and commanding unwavering loyalty, she transformed the gang into a highly disciplined network of thieves. Under her rule, they honed their craft with precision, perfecting sleight-of-hand techniques and developing hidden compartments in their clothing to smuggle stolen goods. Their organization was unparalleled, with members assigned specific roles, some acting as distractions, others as lookouts, ensuring that their heists unfolded with clockwork efficiency. Any member who betrayed the gang's strict code of conduct faced swift and merciless punishment. It was this structure that set them apart, elevating them from common pickpockets to a formidable criminal empire. Despite their success, the authorities were not blind to their growing influence. Police reports detailed thefts that bore the unmistakable mark of the 40 elephants, yet efforts to capture them often ended in frustration. These women operated like ghosts, vanishing into the crowded streets before law enforcement could react. Their ability to evade justice was not just a matter of luck, it was a calculated strategy. They moved frequently, changed their appearances, and used London's rigid class system to their advantage. Who would suspect a well-dressed woman of being a career criminal? The very assumptions that confined women to a life of obedience became the perfect camouflage for a wave of crime that spanned decades. In an era where women were expected to be docile and dependent, the 40 elephants carved out a path of defiance. They did not just steal wealth, they stole power, proving that cunning and discipline could rival even the most feared male gangs. Their legend endured long after their arrests, inspiring both fear and admiration in equal measure. Though some members were eventually caught, their influence remained, their name forever etched in London's criminal history. The 40 elephants were not just thieves. They were pioneers, breaking societal norms one stolen diamond at a time. As Manchester's factories roared and its population swelled, the city's rapid industrial expansion gave rise to chaos in the slums. Among the filth and smoke, a new breed of gang emerged: the scuttlers. Unlike organized criminal enterprises that sought wealth and influence, these young men fought for something far more primal: territorial dominance. Their distinct appearance set them apart: silk scarves tied around their necks to mark allegiance, brass-tipped boots designed for inflicting pain, and a cocky swagger that signaled their defiance. Their battles erupted without warning, transforming alleyways and market squares into war zones, where the clash of iron-tipped clubs, belt buckles, and knives echoed through the streets. The scuttlers' conflicts were fueled by more than just survival. They were territorial disputes deeply rooted in neighborhood pride. Each gang staked its claim over a section of Manchester, defending it with bloodshed against any intruder. A single insult could spark a brutal confrontation, while long-standing feuds between rival districts escalated into full-scale riots. Their preferred weapons: weighted belts, sharpened blades, and heavy clubs left their victims blooded and broken. The city's cobbled streets bore the scars of their reign, stained with the aftermath of yet another night of violence. Though authorities attempted to intervene, their efforts were largely futile. The scuttlers operated in large numbers, overwhelming law enforcement at every turn, while the justice system failed to impose lasting consequences. Despite their reputation as lawless youth, the scuttlers were a product of Manchester's deeper struggles. Poverty, overcrowding, and limited opportunities for honest work created a cycle that funneled young men into gang life. In a world where strength was the only currency that mattered, the gang offered protection, status, and a sense of belonging. For many, it was not just about fighting, it was about survival. The city's industrial success masked the harsh reality of its slums, where children grew up witnessing violence as a way of life. Without intervention, each generation of scuttlers simply replaced the last, ensuring the cycle continued. For decades, Manchester remained gripped by their presence, the authorities powerless to quell the rising tide of violence. Eventually, social reforms, increased policing, and urban redevelopment chipped away at the gang's influence, marking the beginning of their decline. Yet the scuttlers did not simply vanish. Their legacy lingered in the fabric of the city's underworld, inspiring the next wave of gangs that would take their place. Though their time had passed, they left behind a blueprint for street violence, proving that in the darkest corners of industrial Manchester, survival had always been dictated by brutality. Thanks for tuning into the past. Don't forget to subscribe and join me for more stories that shaped our world.